Here we go again. US President Donald Trump is calling the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau two-faced after a video emerged of Trudeau and other world leaders apparently making fun of Trump at the Nato summit. As a result, the US President cutting short his attendance. The 70th anniversary of the gathering saw heated disagreement about several important issues, including future threats and spending. Let's discuss this further. Professor John Stremlaw is with us from the International Relations Unit at Wits University. Professor, good evening to you. Donald Trump aside, 70 years on, how does NATO look?
Not like the organization that I studied when I was an undergraduate and postgraduate student.
So just remind us what ultimate purpose it has to fulfill and whether it in fact is doing so.
Well, it is undergoing naturally as the world changes, adapting to a different world, and the big change that occurred was the end of the Cold War, because it was an alliance that developed in the face of post-World War II East-West tensions and the threat of Soviet expansion as seen then. It is very much an American-led creation, but in recent years it's gotten itself involved with a lot of other issues out of area into Syria and into ISIS fighting, the terrorist fighting, but also the agenda that they were talking about, largely because Donald Trump wanted to raise a lot of different issues, was much more diffuse than in the past. And President Macron of France a few weeks ago, and The Economist was talking about a brain dead NATO. So that there is a real debate to have here, but Trump personalizes everything so much and disrupts things so much that everyone spends their time talking about him, including the heads of state, and Joe Biden, who's going to likely run against him in the presidential election, immediately turned that into a commercial for his candidacy for president.
How then does the bloc insulate itself against Donald Trump, or does it simply not do that, try to get on with business and just tread water until next year's election?
Well, he could get a second term, Jeremy, which would be very bad for South Africa, because South Africa needs a more predictable partner and someone who's not going to mess around with our trade relations and access to American markets, among other things. But to come back to the NATO problem, it is a fact that these heads of state have tried to humor Donald Trump, and when he's done things that they appreciate, they make much of that. Like Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, said that Donald Trump's pressures probably contributed to the increasing contribution NATO members made to the budget of $130 billion in recent years. And so, yes, they do humor him, but he gets very personal very quickly, as he decried Trudeau as two-faced or Macron as nasty.
For the first time, I understand, Professor Stremlaw, the bloc NATO now looking at the rise and the potential threat of China. How important was that conversation?
Well, it's not an appropriate forum, really, for it in the way that, yes, if 5G comes along, we talk about that down here, and the Chinese control the technology for that. Huawei is very big in Europe. Apple is not. Trump would like to see Apple more in there. That's not for NATO to be discussing, Jeremy. The kinds of issues that NATO should be discussing is the invasion of Ukraine, and that was a topmost issue. And then Donald Trump has this relationship with Vladimir Putin that remains to be fully uncovered. But it has meant that the alliance becomes much more unreliable. Donald Trump's pulling out of the U.S. forces without consultation with NATO members that were supporting the Kurds in Syria, for example, was very destabilizing. And it's not a new problem, because Barack Obama made some choices regarding Syria that seemed to suggest that the U.S. commitment to a NATO policy was less than firm as it always had been. So it's natural that the U.S. should be pulling back a bit, but not as volatile a relationship as Donald Trump is responsible for.
From Wits University, Professor of International Relations, John Stremlaw, thank you very much.